So I think give me a little bit of time so I go through the discussion. So and at the end I can answer questions. And obviously these are kind of my personal thoughts based on the last, I said 12 months or almost like maybe 15 months that there's new trends of LLMs out there. So it's just be aware of that. Um, I choose a topic as embarrassing the unpredictable, and I think that's the most important things that we have to learn here. Um, as I said, the goal is basically highlight some of the challenges that we have with developing LLM applications. It's kind of a little bit different and kind of a little bit, maybe a lot different than classic product development. And also thinking about ways to actually embrace it, kind of this dynamicness and undeterministic of AI. Um, a lot of things that I'm gonna talk about is just basically pointing that, hey, watch out for this, watch out for that. I won't have time enough time to get into the details of how to solve these problems. But my point is just think about it when you're building this product. And yeah, and also kind of hopefully product managers and engineers can work a lot closely to kind of address these problems, because I feel like the new nature of these applications create a whole bunch of different responsibilities that in a lot of different organizations, from small startups to the very large organizations, kind of who is doing what is something that everyone is trying to figure out. But for your project to be successful, I think as a stakeholder that you want this to be successful, you have to watch out and making sure that we are thinking about those stuff, and you have an answer for it, no matter who is doing it, right? So that's kind of the part of the goal. So thinking about like how we were doing the product, man, building the product, you guys know it a lot better than me. I'm just kind of going very hand wavy on it. Is that you basically start some kind of a conceptualizations, planning, all those kind of stuff, do market fit, all those things, and then you go through the design, development aspects, and then testing, and finally deployment, right? So it's how we always have been doing. Now, we always had the A/B testing. We always had the concept of like generating, like doing MVP and reiterating. All those kind of stuff are same, and we are very familiar with it. But one interesting thing that I think it's a little bit different is that when you're building a classic application, let's say you have a user interface, there is a form, there's a database at the end, there is some way that you can fetch data or analyze data. So it's very classic applications. You do A/B testing to see how the users go through your scenario. So that part is unknown, right? It has always been unknown. You would need to test it. But the success of a scenario, saying that if the user starts from typing something in a form, it will get recorded into the database reliably and good performance, has always been on an engineering side. And they were kind of able to, with a very high confidence, with a very high SLA, solve those problems. And even if in cases that you had the design issues or miscommunications or buggy things, you could always spend like a week and kind of push it and kind of do a bug bash and resolve all these kind of problems, right? But the burden of getting a scenario deterministically successful has been always on a engineering. And we knew that our engineering side can solve this problem easily, relatively, right? I think with a lot of this LLM and generative AIs, one thing is that, and you've seen it even in the talks from Sam or people who are really, really good at this, is that the nature of it is undeterministic. So you might actually define a scenario. You say, hey, my user is going to start here, go through this path, and then end up here, which here is a place that he or she is successful. In the middle, if you are depending on these LLMs or different kind of this generative AIs, there is always a chance that randomly things goes the way that you do not like it to go, right? There is a whole bunch of different random outcome that can happen. And if any engineers comes to you and say, I'm 100% sure that I can get it right 100% of time, that person does not know what he's talking about or she's talking about, right? So it's all about the amount of undeterministics, not if it's going to exist or not. I mean, we are getting a lot better. Like in the past years, I can say that we are learning a lot, and the industry is like building and building, and applications are becoming more reliable. But you always have to think about, instead of one number, now you have to think about the statistics. It's not about one number that you hit, it's about the range that you are going to hit. And as a product developer, you need to think about that, and you need to plan for it, because you cannot just say, hey, my scenario is going to be exactly 100% of time like that. Yeah, so basically the message is that think about the unexpected and plan for it. The other topic that I think it's very interesting is generally AI alignment. And I don't know if you guys know, I'm just basically pointing out what AI alignment is. I mean, you might also hear about like responsible AI, AI safety, all those kind of stuff. But it basically mean that how you can get your AI behavior to be exactly what you want. And this exactly what you want, it means like it actually finish your scenarios, or it doesn't, you don't have your users or maybe a bad actor getting it to do something that is embarrassing or something that's damaging, all those kind of stuff. Or even like in a more philosophical way, I mean, if you talk to a whole bunch of people like Ilya, that, if you listen to their talk, or people that are working in this area, there's also another general worries that if AI is going to kill us or not. I mean, that's probably a very more high level or maybe futuristic part of it, which might or might not, I don't think it's applied anytime soon to the products that we are building. But just generally speaking, for things that are we are starting to build using the GPT and stuff like that, it's very important to see that if it's actually aligned with what we want. And it changes success rate of it. So if your product and yeah, so that's kind of like part of your success now. The interesting thing is that it is not something that you get right at the first, right? So it's a very iterative process, and even what is right is very interesting, like how you would define this alignment. So you have to watch out and be ready for an evolving process, a process that you go through until you get to a acceptable or perfect, maybe if it exists, a perfect point, right? Now, one interesting thing is that if you want to think about all these risk of misaligned AI, you can think about like damages that it can cause to your customers, right? So it can corrupt your customers' data. It can create a wrong result. Like there was an example that when ChatGPT just came into the market, there was a lawyer that just used it to generate some text and use it for his case, and then he realized that it was just all hallucination, that the case didn't exist, that all of it was made up by the AI. So it's interesting to kind of make sure that we have at least understanding and guides or guards against all this conflict. So you can think about all these different tools that you have to make sure that things is first is making sure that user have a understanding. We guard our product to make sure that it doesn't really get out of hands, and also kind of educate our users. Like those kind of stuff are very interesting, how you can manage those things. It can also be damaging to your company, right? So your brand can be damaged, you might have a data loss, you can, revenue loss, or even security, right? Security attacks is a very new thing, and we are just learning. So that's our interesting risk. and the legal risk as well, right? So we don't know what's going to happen, and there is a lot of different legal jurisdictions, and everything is new. So it's very interesting, especially in areas that are there's a lot of regulatories like healthcare, finance, and those kind of stuff. It's kind of like a very interesting. Now, how would you like the ways that you want to think about how you manage those risks or even assess it is, in my opinion, it kind of goes to few high level areas. One is, how do you set the expectation? First of all, set the expectation for your users. When we are releasing all these AIs, there is a huge hype, right? So people read about it, they feel, and there's a lot of people that actually create a false hype as well on Twitter or on other different places just because they want to have attentions or followers. But generally, it's the job to make sure that the expectation of the users is aligned with the capability of the product. And it's all most of the time what we are seeing is it's extremely higher than, for example, the scenario that we are building or the capability of the product. Sometimes it's lower and they get a nice, interesting surprise. But it's very important to make sure that what we are promising is what we are actually delivering here, because otherwise, sometimes moving your product toward that expectation might be one of those a little bit more harder problems that scientists are working on it, or so that's one thing. Assess your risk profile. I mean, a lot of these things that we are talking about might not even apply to your company or might apply. It's really depend on the company, the size of it, where you are, or even the product that you're building. For example, if you're building a game and you're using AI in that game, and maybe if that game is for adults, you have a completely different set of expectation versus if you're building it for the I don't know, finance company or a legal firm or stuff like. So there is a very different risk, and so I think that's part of building it and communicating it with the engineering and data scientists to make sure that it actually we are hitting those. You and it's also because different efforts to get things right for each of these areas, it can have a completely different cost, right? So it's important to know those. Of course, early consideration and everything with these things is that kind of think about it, because once you're starting shipping it and then you realize that you cannot really get it to those benchmarks or those minimum bar that you want, you might have a product in your hand that you spend like weeks on it, and you have to spend another 6 months to kind of get it into the frame that you can ship it, right? Of course, legal consultations and privacy consideration is also true, especially a lot of these models, when they do inference, they are not as much exposing private information. The inference is stateless, at least in most cases. But if you are trying to kind of start to learn and kind of improved or kind of have a personalized experience, then you have a lot of these kind of now privacy consideration, especially if you're working across Europe and other places. So that's one thing. So again, some of this might apply to you, some of it might absolutely not apply to you. So it just kind of really depends on where you are, right? This is one example of many examples that we've been seeing online and or different places, that people shift something with the GPT, and then someone comes in, or sometimes very easily, sometimes it involves more, but they get these machines to do things or say things that are not right. In this example, this guy actually started to talk to this dealership chatbot and kind of convinced it to sell a car to it for $1, and it was kind of like going around the Twitter. So these are kind of stuff that and I've seen it for Expedia had actually another issue like this, and it's all around the place. So you want to kind of watch out for these things. Yeah. So the interesting thing, as I said, is that if you assume that you are basically at this point, it's your perfect point, that you are basically 100% hitting your customers' ask and requirements, right? So you don't really say no to any legitimate customer's request. But at the same time, you don't do anything wrong, right? So this is your golden point. You most likely don't hit here. Actually, not most likely, you won't hit here. So you always are either on this side or on this side. And your job is to see, and by you, I mean the whole product team, from the data scientists, engineers, product managers, designers, all of the team, need to work toward how they can get closer to this. There are a few ways that there is a mechanism to get to there, and how you would start to build your product toward getting there. I'm going to talk about it, but remember that again, it's a kind of a iterative work that you have to do. So um, the first thing is defining some kind of matrices. So we all know how to define matrices. We have been always doing it. But in this case, you need to have a specific matrix. It's not just about usage. It's not about like a revenue that this brings, all those kind of stuff. I mean, those are very important. I'm not saying they're not important. I'm saying that you need to have a new set of measurements. And these measurements are measuring how successfully you are hitting or getting closer to that goal point that I was talking about. And you can be creative. It's really depend on your business, but you basically want to have two kind of things and measure them in the same way. One is that something that measures how successfully you are completing the legitimate users' questions or requests, and also having some kind of measurement that kind of measures how often you get out of that rate. Like you either generated something that was hallucination, something that was useless, or maybe offensive or things like that. So you need to have both of that. So you can basically start to build those and fix it quickly and get closer and closer and closer to the point that you want. And I think you would have to kind of define those and define where is the place that you are ready to ship that product. So usually to me it's kind of like you build it, you test it, and you start with a smaller community or group and try to build it, and you define and say, hey, if we get to this point, we are going to be able to ship it, or we are going to be able to ship it with for these people or that. I think this is very important to have those defined. And it's not as straightforward. Sometimes you need to talk to a lot of different stakeholder, and as I said, it's all about managing the where you are. So it's not like a mathematics lesson said to be able to kind of optimize it as you go. And again, making sure that you are giving a balance to all of this. If you have a AI that is just very restrictive, but it just doesn't do anything that your customers want, it's just it's not a good product. But and on the other side, it's true. Let's say it's just always answer your customers, but at the same time, it also creates a whole bunch of hallucinations or does these things that we saw like in those chat box. So it's very important. The other way is that now once you have your these matrices, how would you try to kind of improve that, right? So again, each of these things are really for itself, it's a big talk, but what kind of infrastructures you want to build to be able to kind of improve your system, right? One of it is that you need to have a feedback mechanism. So without a feedback mechanism, you're basically blind. You don't know what's going on, and you might kind of just learn something from like a Twitter, right? So but you want to have a feedback mechanism, and this feedback mechanism we've saw it a lot. It can be inside that UI with a thumbs down, like asking users to give you feedback immediately. Like for example, um, GPT does it really greatly. Like every time that they respond, you get the options, you get a thumbs down, thumbs up, down, and you have ability to kind of feed it with the information. So those kind of stuff is interesting. Getting the feedback at the time that user is not happy with your outcome is, I think it's very crucial. Like and a lot of companies do that. Like Tesla, you are doing your, even like you're doing your self-driving, like it's, you're using the self-driving options. And as soon as you start to get out of it and you disengage it, it asks you to give a feedback. And even when you are driving, you can talk. It asks you to talk to it and get a feedback. So it's very important to be able to get that. A/B testing, as usual, like being able to test a whole bunch of different options with different people is very important. You can also like sometimes, I mean, even the GPT does that, is that you can also generate two kind of results, right? So you can say, okay, I'm going through this request or this scenario that you have, and now I have two results. Which one do you like more? Right? Or you can show it to the same person. You can show it to the different group of people at the same time. But these are very important for you to be able to build this, especially now that everyone is early. The more you know, the more and faster you can actually get closer to that point. It's more valuable. So I think that's a thanks. Also, one important thing is that when you're thinking about your scenario, it's good to kind of have a measurement from end to end of your scenario. When the user is actually start to engage in this user story, and when she successfully or maybe non-successfully is out of it. So if you have a way to measure that, and you have a number of outcomes that are which how many times it was successful or not successful, and telemetry there, it can help you to understand where you are and where in the unpredictability is, and see how you can address it. And iterative learning, it's more involved. A lot of people cannot do iterative and reinforcement learning, but if you have the ability to it, that can be really helpful. And that's kind of in a word of like GPT being able to do a lot of things and getting more stronger. If you are trying to build your small team that it's just you and you want to make money out of it, it's very important to be able to learn and get better in that specific task compared to the general models that are getting better every day. The final topic that I want to talk about, so I think the first topic was like just generally how the reliability and alignment and how you want to make sure that your product is actually do what you're expecting, and it's kind of, you define a range of areas that you feel your products might hit and have a kind of plan for it. But the other part is the performance and cost. It's easy to say that, hey, I'm just going to go and focus on this scenario and make it happen, and completely forget about the performance and cost of LLM. And traditionally, it was really okay because first of all, we wouldn't really get to the performance problem anytime soon, right? Like when you're creating a classic applications, from the point of view kind of releasing to the point that you actually have a performance problem is probably a few years in your startup life, right? Or even your initial product, right? So it wasn't really as hitting us as fast as now with the LLMs, right? So with LLMs, let me go to that next slide. Some of these models are first, they're very expensive. You might try it and say, oh, this is just a few cents or a few dollars, but it adds up very fast, especially if you're trying to give it them more context, right? GPT-4 is going to have 120,000 token context size, which is great because now you can solve a lot more problems, right? So you might be very excited. So now I can just put everything I have and put it in a prompt and get the result out of it. But you have to pay for it. So it's good and powerful, but it also means a lot of money, and also the performance of it. And some of this performance bottleneck, it might not be able to easy to solve it, because now to solve it, you might need to completely go to the different model, or even the technology might not be here, or your in this world of GPU shortage, you might not even be able to get enough GPUs for your scenario to be able to actually make it better. So it's very important to design your scenarios and think about the performance. Think about it, is my scenario going to be performance sensitive? And what's the range that users are happy to accept it? And if I'm taking like seconds to kind of go and do my inference and all those kind of other stuff that I have to do, and remember, it's just, in a production, you're gonna have a lot of traditional layer, you have your inference, and then you have maybe looks up and research, and then you have all those AI safety layer that they have to make sure that the output and inputs are kind of on a safe layer. So it is going to take some time. So think about that scenario and define your performance range. Experiment that if you can hit it. And if you cannot, it might be so fine, as long as you think about the way to kind of still keep your user engaged, and so she won't get bored or he won't get bored, and you still have them. Also, yeah, so and the models are important. Like, don't start to say, oh, I have a GPT-4, I got access to it, and now let me solve all this problem with GPT-4. Yes, you're probably gonna get better answers out of the box faster, but sometimes these models are extremely different on a performance. Like, I think sometimes like GPT-4 can be 10 times slower than 3.5, right? Or even more, or even less, really depend on your configurations. So it might take you longer to get a 3.5 to work and create what you want compared to the 4, but the cost and performance might actually be worth it. And also, there's a lot of other models that are out there, and I think there's an area that I'm really excited and I love to study about it, is all these smaller models that people are building that you can also run on your MacBook. Like on my MacBook, with my M2 machines, it's a MacBook Air, I could run a model with 5 billion parameters and 30 billion parameters, even if it was slower, but I could do that. And so it's interesting to kind of encourage to explore all other options rather than just saying, oh, yes, of course, if I ask GPT-4, I might get a result immediately, but is it going to perform from cost or speed? And explore other options that are out there. So anyway, that's kind of the end of it. The takeaway, as I said, I want to kind of point out to things that how some of the stuff that we used to be able to do trivially is now it's challenging, and we have to kind of build it into your scenario. Cost and performance is very, very important, and they might not be trivial to solve at the end of when you're kind of having your product ready, and then you realize that, oh my God, it takes me 30 seconds to finish something. It's not going to be good. So think about those, and yeah, prioritize user experience as well. Cool.